Focus on Headline. And let's take a look at what major issues are making the headlines today on Focus on Headline. For this, joining us in the studio, we have our reporters Han-dan and Che-ji-hee. Welcome back to the studio.
Good evening.
I just have to say, the air quality outside is really bad, so my throat is acting up.
I know, same here. Oh my God.
And the air isn't too good inside here neither. So I just want to give a heads up to our reporters and also our listeners out there. Excuse me, there's going to be a lot of coughing going on. It's not because I'm sick. Nevertheless, starting things off with some economy-related news. I think there's been a ton of this, news coming out in regards to the growth rate and so forth. And the International Monetary Fund has lowered the annual growth rate for South Korea in its recently released Outlook report. But inflation was raised by almost 1 percentage point. Ji, you're going to start us off with the details of this.
Right. So in its latest World Economic Outlook report, the IMF revised its forecast for the gross domestic product growth of South Korea by 0.5 percentage points from its earlier prediction of 3% to 2.5%. Now, the international organization predicted that the country's economy would stay in the mid 2% range this year in the wake of the war between Ukraine and Russia. It also pointed to damage to the supply chain, surging oil prices, and interest rate increases, as well as mounting debt in the private sector as reasons to lower its growth expectations. Now, the IMF's growth forecast for the country is lower than the Bank of Korea's estimate of 3% and the 2.7% suggested by Fitch Ratings and Moody's Investors Service. It also revised its GDP growth outlook for several major economies. The U.S. economy's outlook was lowered by 0.3 percentage points to 3.7%. The Eurozone was lowered by 1.1 percentage points to 2.8%. The UK by 1 percentage point to 3.7%. And Japan by 0.9 percentage points to 2.4%. And among the emerging market economies, China was projected to grow by 4.4%, which was lower than the organization's earlier forecast of 4.8%. South Korea is one of over 140 countries that the IMF lowered growth expectations for 2022. And as for the global economy, the IMF lowered its 2022 growth forecast to 3.6% from its earlier estimate of 4.4%. Meanwhile, the agency raised its outlook for Korea's inflation to 4% this year, up by 0.9 percentage points from its earlier projection of 3.1% a month ago. The global agency explained that a series of negative factors, such as high inflation, currency deflation, and economic slowdown, are expected to continue as geopolitical crises are added while a large amount of money has been released to address the COVID-19 crisis.
That's right. And of course, we were hoping that as the COVID-19 situation does settle down, things were going to look a little bit rosier. But it is amid the continuing war in Ukraine. The so-called agflation is worsening by the day with the prices of corn hitting a 9-year high as the surge in commodities continue as well. Tan, how serious is the situation, though?
SJ, like you said, just when we thought the global supply bottleneck was getting better as the world gears up to exit COVID restrictions, came Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and now prices are soaring across all sectors. But we're seeing a particularly steep rise in the prices of corn and other agricultural produce, which are further pushing up the general consumer prices. According to CNBC, the contracts for July corn futures were trading above $8 per bushel on Monday, the highest level since September 2012. It's not a surprise, though, because we saw this coming, given that Russia and Ukraine take up over 20% of the global corn production. What's more concerning, though, is that corn is just one of several agricultural commodities that has seen surging prices in recent weeks, of course, in part due to the war in Ukraine. And I've been pointing this out even before Russia launched an attack on Ukraine, that Ukraine is the world's 5th largest exporter of wheat and a major exporter of other items such as sunflower oil. Sunflower is actually actually the national flower of Ukraine,
Oh, wow.
a country that boasts the largest amount of sunflower seed production in the world. Now, Russia is the world's biggest wheat exporter and also a key exporter of many of the chemicals used in fertilizers. And so a war between the two have also shot up the prices of cooking oil, with prices of sunflower oil and canola oil rising by over 40% and 70% respectively at the end of last month. Now, this is what's leading futures traders to bet that higher input costs and more demand for corn as a substitute food item will continue to drive up the prices.
All right, so Tom, this is a big question, right? I mean, we're looking at a long-term agflation then. I mean, how long before we start seeing the prices go down once again?
So what we call agflation, a term that combines agriculture and inflation, is projected to last for quite some time, at least throughout the first half of this year. Bloomberg, citing experts, projected that reduced corn production in Ukraine and rise in fertilizer prices due to Russia's sanctions will trigger a vicious cycle that leads to supply woes of other agricultural commodities. The International Rice Research Institute predicted that this will also have an impact on Asia's rice production, cutting the amount at least by 10% this year. The World Bank has also warned earlier this month that global food insecurity was likely to rise this year due to the higher prices.
We're going to continue to talk about this agflation that's going on because wheat import prices in the country have also hit a record high for the first time in 13 years. Again, this due to the crisis over in Ukraine. So, Jihee, tell us about this.
Sure. So recent data revealed that South Korea's wheat import prices in March soared to the highest figure since 2008, like you said, impacted by Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the global supply chain bottleneck. The country's import prices of wheat, which amounted to $402 per ton last month, is an 8.8% increase from the previous month and the highest level since December 2008. Now, the import price shot up by a whopping 41.4% compared to the previous year and up by 54.3% from March 22, which was the early stage of the COVID-19 outbreak. Now, the spike is largely attributable due to the war in Ukraine and soaring ocean shipping costs from a global supply chain disruption. Now, wheat imported from Russia and Ukraine is mainly used for animal feed in South Korea. But what's most concerning of all is that the spike in wheat import costs will drive up domestic prices of wheat-based foods as well as dining out costs. So, for example, according to a recent report on food prices, the average price of chopped noodles made with wheat, or kalguksu we call them, rose by 8.7% within a year. And this is the first time that the price of this particular Korean dish surpassed the 8,000 won mark. Yes, and the average prices of cold noodles, or naengmyeon we call them, and black bean sauce noodles, jjajangmyeon, they're both not known to be that expensive dishes here in the country. They rose by almost 10% on year as well. So exports voiced concerns that wheat import prices are likely to continue to go up further, driving up dining prices as well, due to the protracted war in Ukraine, as well as, once again, the global supply chain bottleneck.
You know, for our listeners out there, kalguksu, that's literally one of the more affordable dishes here in Korea. It's very simple. It's very delicious. It's one of those things, you know, I used to go to the market to enjoy, but 8,000 Korean won for a bowl of kalguksu. Again, the prices are getting ridiculous here. I think if everyone, for a lot of the office workers who go out for lunch, and I think they're really feeling the brunt of it, not just the noodles, but just food overall is skyrocketing right now. But again, if agflation, inflation, all of this, the rise in prices continue to soar, we're expecting this to be, at least for the first half here, what has to be Korea's strategy in coping with these soaring prices? Let's start off with you, Tan.
You know, this is not the first time that Korea has seen the threat of a looming agflation. You know, back in 2005 or even in 2008, when climate change began to trigger natural disasters like massive floods in countries like the U.S. and Brazil, there was a looming threat of agflation, and Korean authorities and experts actually put their heads together since 2005 or even before that, trying to draw up measures to mitigate the impact. And back then, they actually discussed ways to build a large-scale production line of agricultural commodities overseas, like in countries like Brazil and Ukraine. They actually talked about the specific country, Ukraine, in 2005. So I think it's very regrettable that we're still yet to see a clear, solid output of those discussions after all these years.
Yeah.
But it's better late than never. And so I think what Korea should do now is to diversify its import channels of agricultural commodities. It's the easiest and the quickest fix, I think, at this stage. And so we should look for, very promptly, look for ways to diversify the import channels. And another way is also to reduce the heavy dependency on agricultural imports. And of course, a significant amount of government support will be needed to materialize that.
I mean, the only thing is, I mean, again, South Korea being a country that's very limited in land space, right? It's hard to kind of expand farmland or create more, I guess, agriculturally capable farmland. But the other thing that I want to point out here, the reason why I think diversifying maybe the import portfolio, it's difficult because let's say if one country, their prices are soaring, and so you seek out another country for some of their agricultural goods, they know that they are high in demand. So what do? They jack up the prices
yes,
as well.
That is true.
Yeah, so it's one of those things. I really think I wish there was some kind of answer to this. I don't know, Jihi, do you have an answer to this?
Oh, I wish I did too. I'm not an expert in economy. And diversifying the import sources is a measure that must be taken, like Taun said. And there are actually a few other measures that the government has already taken to respond to the increasing consumer prices. For example, they've extended the fuel tax cuts from 20% to 30%, which will take effect until July. And they also will be providing subsidies for like business cargoes and buses, as well as freight ships. And then they're also, they have the supplementary budget for all the small businesses that have been hit hard by the pandemic. But all these are just temporary measures.
Yeah.
And experts think that or expect this inflation trend to continue for at least 1 or 2 more years, which means we need a long-term comprehensive measure to combat this serious rise in consumer prices. I mean, it's the highest in 10 years, and it's definitely gonna hit the low-income families, the small businesses, the self-employed, and the most marginalized in our society. So I think the Yoon administration's priority, we talked about this yesterday, and I don't think I mentioned it. I mentioned real estate as the number one priority to tackle, but I think it's actually inflation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. But it's really complex given the fact that we have so many uncertainties going on right now with the Ukraine war and the global stagnation, etc. So yeah, I wish I had the answer, but it should be tackled comprehensively.
Yeah, again, I mean, when we talked about yesterday with Soa, what are some of the key issues that needs to be tackled by the Yoon administration? The issue that I brought up was inflation, but the problem with, agflation is the fact that let's say some other, consumer prices, if they raise key interest rates, then inflation is going to slightly go down. But I feel like it's really not the case with some of the agricultural goods because it's much more than just the interest rates that are involved with this. And another thing that we're seeing, I mean, to mention fuel prices as well. I don't know if you guys seen the gas stations these days. I drive a diesel car, right? And I chose a diesel car, and I'm sorry for all the people out there, for environmental friendly people out there. I chose it because it was a much cheaper option than the gasoline cars, right? And there was a difference of about prior to all this, there was a difference of about maybe 400 or 500 won. Now, there is a gas station that I drive by all the time. Diesel prices are more expensive than gasoline. I have never seen that. Now, why is that a problem? Because diesel fuel is not only used by drivers like myself, but those who deliver, who are doing the shipping, the cargo trucks and ships as well. And so it's a huge problem right now. I honestly wish there was some kind of clear-cut answer to this, but the only solution is, I guess, no more war, right? I mean, that's kind of the biggest catalyst to all this right now. But we'll have to continue to see because, again, prices are just getting out of hand right now. In the meantime, a set of key international labor organization conventions took effect in South Korea today, 14 months after the nation's parliament ratified them. Tan, first and foremost, can you explain to us each of those global labor rights that newly went into force today?
Sure. So 3 International Labor Organization or ILO conventions took effect as of today, and those are Convention number 29 on forced labor, number 87 on the freedom of association and protection of the right to organize, and number 98 on the right to organize and collective bargaining. The implementation is not expected to bring a huge change, as Korea amended last year its own related domestic labor laws, including the Trade Union and Labor Relations Adjustment Act and the Act on the Establishment and Operation of Teachers' Unions in line with these conventions. So the key issue regarding the ILO conventions going into force in Korea is not about the 3 conventions in and of itself, but more about its possible clash against domestic labor laws. Some are voicing concerns that this could further escalate the already prevalent labor conflicts in Korea. Korea's labor ministry says that these conventions will have the same legal status as domestic laws, meaning that they won't be the upper laws that can rule over domestic laws, but still a Korean laborer can file suit based on these new ILO conventions, and the court would have to consider the ILO standards when ruling. And this, some worry, could bring about a huge confusion to Korea's labor conflicts. Now, the revised domestic labor laws still do not fully meet the ILO standard, such as prohibition on the creation of labor unions of self-employed people or freelancers defined as non-workers by law. In contrast, the ILO Convention on the Freedom of Association stipulates workers without any distinction have the right to establish labor unions. And on that note, the Korea Enterprises Federation said there are concerns that problems between Korea's labor and management may become a global issue as the ILO conventions take legal force, degrading the image of South Korean companies while increasing the possibility of trade disputes. But of course, labor activists welcomed the ILO conventions with open arms, calling for further amendment of domestic labor laws to reduce the disparity and the existing differences with the conventions.
Geez, us freelancers are defined as non-workers by law. That's actually one of the problems I've always had. I do understand as freelancers, we're not going to have the same kind of rights as, full-time workers and so forth.
You know what's even worse is that it's called 근로자가 아닌 자 in Korean.
That's literally
non-workers. That's literally non-workers. You're absolutely right. But I just have to put it out there, though. I do want to thank Arirang, though. They are offering insurances for freelance broadcasters. So
very grateful for that.
I am very, very grateful for that. I just want to put it out there. We're going to shift gears here, something that we've been following for some quite time now. It's been, believe it or not, 2 months. We're talking about the war in Ukraine here. This time, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky announcing that Russia began its offensives in the Donbas region, setting off another stage of war operation in Ukraine's eastern region here. Now, Russian forces are being reinforced in the region, additional battalion tactical groups, and even mercenaries having been deployed there. Jihi, let's get the details of this.
Sure. So over the last several days, Russia added about 11 BTGs, or Russian Battalion Tactical Groups, and they compose of combined arms elements, including air defense, armor, tactical vehicles, artillery, helicopters, engineering, and logistical support in the Donbas region and the southeast region of Ukraine. Now, there are 76 BTGs in total, and about 22 of them are likely being resupplied and refitted in the northern part of the country. And about a dozen of those inside Ukraine are trying to take over Mariupol, which is Ukraine's key port. And Russia has also deployed up to 20,000 mercenaries from Syria, Libya, and elsewhere in its new offensive in the Donbas region. Now, these mercenaries, according to a European official, have been sent into battle without any heavy equipment or armored vehicles and are mainly used as a mass against the Ukrainian resistance. Now, the mercenaries are being ordered to capture as much as possible of eastern Ukraine. And according to the same European official, Moscow holds 4 objectives in this second phase of its war in Ukraine. And first of it is to capture the Donbas. Second is to secure a land bridge to Crimea through Mariupol. And third is to seize Kherson Oblast to secure the supply of fresh water to Crimea. And fourth is to capture additional territory that could be used as a bargaining chip in their negotiations. Now, the AP also reported, citing military experts, that the Kremlin aims to surround the Ukrainian forces from the east, south, and north sides. So basically 3 sides of the country. Despite Russia's such reinforcement of forces and increased attacks, Ukrainian forces are managing to resist the Russian troops in trying to take over Donbas as well as Mariupol.
Again, it is unbelievable that after 2 months, it's still going on right now. But as Russia's attacks widen, the U.S. is also stepping up its military aid to Ukraine. President Joe Biden expected to announce an additional military aid package to the country real soon. Don, let's get the details of that.
Right. President Joe Biden is planning to announce a new military aid package for Ukraine, roughly the same size as the $800 million package approved just last week. According to CNN and Reuters, this will boost total U.S. military assistance to Ukraine to over $3 billion. Biden told reporters Tuesday that the U.S. would send more artillery to Ukraine, supplementing the 18 howitzers included in last week's military aid package. The reports emerged hours after Biden held a video conference with NATO leaders, which White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said included a discussion of providing additional ammunition and security aid to Ukraine. The previous $800 million military aid package announced last Wednesday included equipment ranging from helicopters and switchblade drones to body armors and shipments of chemical, biological, and nuclear protective gear. U.S. military aid to Ukraine following Russia's invasion began with shipments of portable anti-aircraft missiles and has grown to include larger and more sophisticated advanced hardware like armored personnel carriers, laser rangefinders, anti-personnel mines, and also an array of aerial and aquatic drones.
We're also hearing that more world leaders are pledging to send more artillery to Ukraine as well.
That's right. After a 90-minute video call between President Biden and his British and Canadian counterparts, as well as other allied leaders on Tuesday, which was also attended by leaders of Germany, Italy, and Poland, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said that the leaders reaffirmed their commitment to providing Ukraine with security, economic, and humanitarian assistance. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz noted that the goal of dozens of nations is to make Ukraine's military capable of resisting Russian aggression, while British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said the UK is looking at ways to supply anti-ship missiles to Ukraine, also adding that his country has other options under consideration as well.
Again, it's unbelievable. 2 months right now, and the fact is that it seems like there is no solution really as to how this is going to end right now. I mean, you know, one of the interesting things that I read earlier this morning was, I don't know if you guys know who Garry Kasparov is. He's the very famous Russian chess master. He was known in the 90s to have played IBM's it was a Deep Blue.
Oh, Deep Blue.
It was like the best chess player versus like the computer, right? Before we had the whole Isidore and you know the AI match. Yeah, he was saying that the only way he sees, and now he's not a military expert, but what he was saying is, he said the only solution he sees, the only end game, is if within the inner circle of Putin's people, there's a coup. Because right now, what's happening apparently is Putin's not liking the results of all the things that are going on in Ukraine. He thought that he would have taken out all the different regions that he was invading, that it would have been done by now.
Right, by now.
Yeah, according to Putin's plan that he had in his mind. That's certainly not happening. Ukraine is doing a fantastic job fighting off their offensive. Putin's blaming each of his, kind of inner circle people when it's not their fault. And so now there's going to be a point in time when they're going to turn their back on Putin. And he was saying that the only way this is going to end is if there is a coup, not a military coup, but just like a coup within the inner circle.
You know, but
And-
it's very frustrating to hear that is the only way for an end game, to put brakes on this. That's quite frustrating because, I mean, what are the possibilities?
Yeah,
Right?
They say the
Right.
possibilities are really low, though, for that.
Exactly.
It is low,
Yeah.
right? I mean, because what if, let's say, because if one person decides, all right, let's go for a coup, right? And then Putin finds out. It's game over for him, right? And what if like one person wants it, but the rest doesn't want to risk their lives, and kind of the power that they're holding right now being part of the inner circle, what's going to happen? So, a lot of people are saying, well, why can't other country get involved? Well, if the U.S. gets involved with the war militarily, that's World War III. So
Exactly.
that's the frustrating part. There is no real end game at this time. In the meantime, speaking of end game, we are hoping to see an end game on this COVID-19 pandemic, right? Fewer cases of COVID-19 being reported today compared to yesterday. The Omicron surges continuing its downward trend here. Now, while the social distancing measures have completely been lifted, the government did say that mask mandates are going to be in place for now, but they're talking about lifting the outdoor mask mandates real soon. So let's hear about this, Ji.
Right. So as of today, 111,319 new COVID-19 infections were additionally reported in the country. So the total caseload stands at 16,583,220. Compared to a week ago, the latest tally has dropped by 43% or down by 84,100 cases. This clearly is a sign that the Omicron variant is on a downward trend, and the reproduction rate, which represents new infections estimated to derive from a single case, stood at 0.78, and as we know, a figure below 1 means the virus is loosening its hold.
Yeah.
The number of severely ill patients dropped to 808, maintaining the 800 level for the fourth straight day. And the hospital bed occupancy rate dropped by 3.1% to 43%, and that's still manageable. And 600,245 people are being treated at home, which is a drop by over 40,000. Now, the fatality rate is 0.13%, continuously going down. And starting this Monday, like you said, the government lifted most pandemic restrictions with an exception on the mask mandate. But it was deemed as premature to lift the mask mandate along with the other social distancing measures because the country is still seeing tens of thousands of daily infections, although the figures are going down. But the government announced that it will decide whether to lift at least the outdoor mask mandate, keeping the indoor mask wearing requirement in early May.
All right, so I want to kind of talk about the mask mandate. And there's going to be other restrictions that are going to be lifted moving forward here, but specifically the lifting of the mandatory mask rules outdoors first, because I think eventually it's going to be lifted for indoors as well, but we're going to take this one step at a time. I want to get your take on the lifting of the outdoor mask mandate. Let's start off with you, Tan.
I think it's about time that we allow people to walk around freely, at least outdoors, where there's a much lower risk of virus infection than indoors. And arguably, the four most advanced nations, the U.S., France, the U.K., and Germany, have actually lifted mandatory mask wearing outdoors and indoors. And I'm sure they have their own reasons for that. I'm sure they have, they've been way ahead of us, beginning with vaccinations to all sorts of research and studies related to COVID-19 that the whole world has referred to as an example, as a real life case example. So, but I'm not saying we should just follow their suit because different countries have different characteristics. And needless to say that Korea has over 60 to 70% of the population are concentrated in the capital region. So I'm not saying we should follow their suit, but I'm saying it's a global trend. And I think it is about time for Korea as well to begin lifting mandatory mask wearing, beginning with outdoors. But of course, the key here will be whether the policy, after implementing that policy for a few weeks, whether we will see a dramatic increase in the number of hospital admissions and deaths. I think those two will be the key points that we should keep close tabs on. And when those numbers begin to soar again, then I think we should put back the mandatory mask wearing policy.
Yeah, you make a very good point with the hospitalization. It's not necessarily, not even, I don't think we're even going to look at the daily case counts anymore because, there's going to be less and less testing being done. We're already seeing that, right? These free PCR tests and the free rapid antigen tests are no longer provided in those testing centers anymore, and you have to go to the clinics and so forth. And so there's just going to be more, quote unquote, shy patients and people who basically have these symptoms and going, you know what, well, I'll get over it. I don't have to get tested. So the numbers aren't going to be real. But the thing that we have to look at is the hospitalization. Jihee, what about yourself? What's your take on the lifting of the mandatory mask mandate for outdoors?
Well, at least for outdoors, I do agree as well. But indoor mask mandates, we should still keep that in place, especially in the multi-use facilities such as gyms or like theaters. But they already are going to be lifting the eating restrictions starting next week, which means there's not much point of having to have the indoor mask mandates if people are able to eat inside the theaters.
Yeah.
They already will have their masks off. And when we're in restaurants, we have to take our masks off, and nobody really listens to stop, like, try not to talk or refrain from talking while you're eating, right? Because people are just eating while talking to each other. And we're still seeing a downward trend in the infections, even though we have that going on. So at least with the outdoor masks, because risks are a lot lower when we're outdoor, I think it'll be okay to lift those mandates at least for now.
You never ate with one of our writers, Chebin, right?
No.
She eats with her mask on.
Is that even possible?
How's that possible?
Well, she kind of
like
like
this.
Yeah, she puts it under her mask, and so
I've seen people do that.
No, the reason why I pointed out is because there are people out there who have masks on inside the restaurant. Okay, so this is what I want to point out. Mask mandates is one thing, all right? Now, this is where it gets a little bit concerning for me. Aside from the mask mandates, another kind of change or easing of restrictions we're going to be seeing maybe as early as next month, I'm assuming, is the quarantine. So they're saying even if you've been confirmed a patient, if you've contracted COVID-19, you are not mandated to quarantine at home. In fact, you could go to work. Now, let's say, okay, for us, we're healthy. Although, Tan, you went through, hell and back after you've been, contracting the COVID-19, but we're okay, all right? But the thing is, let's say you have the coronavirus and you go out and about, at work and so forth, but you bump into a senior citizen maybe, right? And the masks are off. What happens then? That's the biggest concern for me because we are still forgetting that, yes, it might be okay for us, but maybe for the more vulnerable, people with underlying illnesses, senior citizens, it's still dangerous for them, even this Omicron variant. So that's a little bit concerning for me. So I think even though the mask mandates are, lifted, if you do feel sick, I think you should still wear a mask. If you decide that you're not going to quarantine, even after you've been, confirmed a patient, you should have a mask on. That's the least thing you should do.
Yeah.
And I think, senior citizens and those with underlying illnesses, and also, maybe those who are unvaccinated, they should still kind of choose to wear a mask for now,
Right.
even if the mandates are lifted, because that doesn't mean that if you have your mask on, people are going to look at you weird. I think it's still a safer thing, and I know a lot of people who are still opting to wear a mask even if the mandates are lifted. So that's my only concern.
So I guess
to be honest with
voluntary
you.
participation is more important than ever, I guess.
Yeah. And you know what? I'm sure there's going to be more people who are going to have their masks off,
Yeah.
especially with the warmer temperatures. But I'm sure that we're still going to see people who have their masks on for, different reasons. But wow, we're finally seeing a lot of changes being put in place. Another change we're going to be seeing, schools across Korea, of course, as we know, has been put under a lot of restrictions due to this pandemic, switching back and forth from online to offline classes for the past, 2+ years. Today, the education minister has announced a roadmap of the schools' return to pre-pandemic normality. Tana, what are some of the key points there?
Well, first of all students from kindergarten, elementary to middle and high schools across Korea will return to school from May 1st, putting an end to all kinds of online classes that were held for quarantine purposes. So no more online classes except for the very rare and special purposes other than social distancing. Another key point is that schools will resume all curricular and extracurricular activities from next month, such as group field trips or large-scale school events. School trips that we call 수학여행 in Korean can also be organized under the agreement between the faculty and parents. And COVID testing, although it hasn't been mandatory, rather strongly recommended by the Education Ministry to be carried out at least twice a week for students, will be technically suspended as it will be left entirely up to voluntary participation. Education Minister Yoon Hae announced the post-Omicron plan for schools today, where she said the return to normality will be sought in 3 stages. First, the preparation stage, which will last until the end of this month, then the execution stage until May 22nd, and lastly, the settling stage, which will be wrapped up within the first semester of this year. But until the end of this month, current quarantine measures, including the 7-day quarantine of COVID patients and preemptive testing for high-risk students, will remain in place. And along with the changes from next month, students will also be permitted to wear the dental masks or surgical masks that are thinner and easier to breathe than the KF80 or KF94 masks.
All right, there you have it. Certainly seeing a lot of changes left and right. Guys, as always, thank you very much for your report today and insight on some of these issues. Stay safe, and we'll see you guys again.
Thank
See
you
you again.
You can listen to Korea Now with me, SJ Lee, by downloading the Arirang Radio application or tune in online by visiting www.arirangradio.com. So make sure you tune in Mondays through Fridays, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Korea time.